Chris Benner at the Institute for Social Transformation and many other places on campus is a co-designee along with myself. I am the Assistant Director of CITRIS and the Banatao Institute here at UC Santa Cruz. PIT UN is it's founded by the New America think tank in Washington, DC, and its purpose is the study and application of technology expertise to advance the public interest. So focusing on technology outside of the engineering department and really looking at engaging ethical, legal, policy, and societal concerns of technological change. So there's a lot of people doing work within public interest technology on our campus, and we're excited to bring you together. We are, I guess before I jump into our speaker today, wanted to give a quick little plug for, on the next slide, we have CITRIS in support, in partnership with the Institute for Social Transformation. We run a program called Tech for Social Good. It's for student teams developing technology-focused or related solutions to significant societal challenges. And student groups can get up to $5,000 for tech development projects and up to $1,000 for events. We have 3 Zoom info sessions coming up this week and next week. And the RSVPs are right here. So if you're working with students that you think might be interested, please send this information along. Brandie has shared the link to all of this, the slide deck in the chat. So all this information should be right there for you. Which leads me to introducing our speaker today, Dr. Brandie Nonnecke. We are very excited to have her here to speak with us today. Brandie holds a PhD in telecommunications policy and mass communications from Penn State University. She's founding director of the CITRIS Policy Lab at UC Berkeley, where she supports interdisciplinary tech policy research as well as engagement. So it's not just writing. She's no stranger to Sacramento and Washington, DC. Very active work at the lab. She's also a Technology and Human Rights Fellow at the Carr Center for Human Rights Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. And I could go on for probably an hour on the rest of her accomplishments and credentials, but I will not do so. So let me introduce Brandie Nonnecke.
Great, thank you so much, Michael. It's really an honor to be able to meet with all of you today. I'm excited about the possibility of having some of you be able to unmute yourselves and actually engage in discussion. I don't know if any of the others here on the call have been doing a lot of one-way Zoom webinars recently, so it's nice to be able to have that interaction component. I noticed that a couple people just added, so I've put in the chat again the link to today's slides, because I know if you join late, you don't see the posts that were in the chat before you joined, so you should be able to access those slides now. So as Michael said, I work with Michael at the CITRIS and the Banatao Institute. I'm Brandie Nonnecke. I'm the director of the CITRIS Policy Lab. Camille Crittenden is the executive director of CITRIS and the Banatao Institute, and she's also co-founder of the CITRIS Policy Lab. So in case you have any questions about the CITRIS Policy Lab or CITRIS overall, feel free to reach out to either me or Camille. So I wanted to give a quick overview of the structure of CITRIS and the Banatao Institute and how the CITRIS Policy Lab fits in. CITRIS is a very large organized research unit. It is across 4 out of the 10 UC campuses. So we're headquartered at UC Berkeley, but we also operate on the campuses of UC Davis, UC Merced, and UC Santa Cruz. I believe we're one of the largest organized research units within the University of California system. We have over 450 faculty who are actually affiliated with CITRIS across those 4 campuses. You can see our work is split really in this research thrust area between core technology applications and technology and society. Under core technology, we have sustainable infrastructures, where their work looks a lot at smart grids, smart cities, the water energy nexus. We also have people and robots, which looks a lot at human machine teaming, the future of robotics in the workforce. And we also have the health initiative looking at the role of emerging technologies in providing patient-centered care. Now, the technology and society thrust is where I spend most of my time. That's where I direct the CITRIS Policy Lab. As I mentioned before, we support interdisciplinary tech policy research and engagement. We also work with the Future of Work initiative that's looking at the very important area of, well, what's the effect of the implementation of these emerging technologies on the future of work? Will it create jobs? Will it decimate jobs? And then the last is the Women in Technology initiative, which is a collaboration between the College of Engineering at UC Berkeley and CITRIS to support greater diversity and inclusion in the tech sector. You'll see some other areas indicated below around our facilities, labs, and platforms that are available. We do offer a seed funding program. That's how most principal investigators and researchers know about CITRIS. It's an annual seed funding program where we provide funding support up to $60,000 for collaborative research projects between PIs from at least 2 of the CITRIS affiliated campuses. We also have student discovery opportunities. As Michael mentioned, the CITRIS Tech for Social Good program, which is a great way for students to really dig into those experiential learning opportunities and gain a little bit of funding support, up to $5,000 to support technology development and up to $1,000 to support student-led events and programming. If you'll give me 1 second, I have a cat that wants to get out of the door and she's just gonna scratch unless I let her out. So just let me open this door. She's free. So the CITRIS Policy Lab, we support technology, policy, research, and engagement to benefit society. So CITRIS and the Banatao Institute has over almost 20 years of experience supporting the development of information technology solutions to address society's most pressing challenges. And in that work over the last 20 years, the CITRIS has been actually addressing some of these tech policy issues. So in 2018, we decided to formalize the work that we had been doing in that space through the formation of the CITRIS Policy Lab. And over the last 2 years, we've been able to gain really strong partners. You'll see listed here. I'll dive into more detail on the partnerships that we have with a few of these entities, like Microsoft. We have been working with them for the past 4 years. The ID 2020 initiative, which looks at digital identity strategies with a real focus on ensuring that the implementation of digital identity systems does not unfairly bias or discriminate or cause harm to individual civil and political rights. We worked with the Institute for the Future on an area of research that I think all of you on this call will know about, and that's actually computational propaganda. So that's the use of AI and automation to influence public opinion on social media. I think all of us have heard about Russian interference in the 2016 election and the risks for the 2020 election. So I'll summarize some of the work that we've done in that space. We have an exciting partnership with the Silicon Valley Leadership Group on crowdsourcing videos to help communicate the public about the threat of deepfakes before the election. And other collaborations with like the Lawrence Hall of Science, looking at ways to develop programming to teach high school students about the ethics of AI and cybersecurity concerns and appropriate technology and policy strategies. So our research areas fall pretty nicely into these 8 categories. There are some research projects that fall out of these areas, but these are pretty much our core research areas right now. As I mentioned before, we have the computational propaganda work that's identifying and mitigating risks of automated propaganda, especially on election integrity. We have our inclusive AI work. As AI-enabled technologies are being rapidly rolled out, how do we better ensure that those technologies are being built in a way that's fair, accountable, and trustworthy? And in that area, we've done quite a bit of research looking at different technology and policy strategies and recommendations for the public and private sector. We also have digital inclusion work. So really the effects of these technologies on society, the paramount effect is on connected communities or those communities that may not be able to gain access to these tools to better their lives. And so we've been doing work on what are appropriate universal access and service policies to guide digital inclusion. I'm sure all of us who are working from home, our children who are learning from home, and our families that are trying to gain access to healthcare services from home, we feel that the issue of digital inclusion acutely. And especially if you lose internet access during one day a week, it really throws your week off. But imagine if your household cannot afford access and you cannot access these services who are working a lot in that space. We also work in the area of democratic innovations. So what new technologies can be deployed to make our elected leaders more accountable to the constituencies they serve? We've been leading some interesting research that was built upon an earlier initiative within CITRIS called the Data and Democracy Initiative, where we actually built platforms to crowdsource priority policy issues from the public in order to enable elected leaders to really understand what are the needs and priorities of their constituents. Camille Crittenden was the chair of a working group on blockchain for the state of California and recently issued a report looking at what are the promise and perils of blockchain for the state of California. Later in this presentation, I have a slide summarizing that work with a link to the final report. We're also working in the critical area of disaster risk reduction. You know, as we've seen in California over this past summer, the risk of wildfires and its catastrophic effects on not only the economy, but the health and well-being of our California communities is a serious policy issue. And we've supported a couple of research projects in that space on how to capture empirical insights from research to inform evidence-based policymaking. So I'm really excited to tell you more about that work because I think that that collaboration model is a really nice model that we can implement with some of you here on the call today. We also work in digital ID systems. Digital ID is the use of a digital system to record an individual identity. It can be biometric ID, it can be other forms of ID, but ensuring that those systems are not disproportionately leaving out certain populations, ensuring that the technologies that are used are accurate, especially if you're using facial recognition systems. And so I'll talk a little bit about recent reports and point you to where they're located on the CITRIS Policy Lab website. And then the last two areas, health and environmental sustainability. In health, we're working with the CITRIS Health Initiative on two exciting projects looking at the impacts of broadband inclusion and telehealth to deal with the pandemic and looking at those applications for seniors living in senior assisted living centers, and then also looking at the application in low income neighborhoods and the integration with community health workers. And then for environmental sustainability, which is very closely tied to the disaster risk reduction, what policy strategies need to be put in place, especially those dealing with technology that can better ensure that we can capture the data necessary to document environmental sustainability issues and inform appropriate implementation or changed processes to mitigate harms to environmental sustainability. So I just want to point out our recent publications. You can go to the CITRIS Policy Lab website. The URL is listed there on the bottom of the screen. I'm going to talk today about our work with Microsoft on the future of public sector work. I've included two of the digital ID reports here. The first one, Responsible Digital ID, that looked at the civil and political effects of digital ID on civil and political rights and appropriate policy mechanisms to mitigate harm. This one looked primarily at nation state level implementation of digital ID systems. The article on the far right, Facing the Future, that looks at the risks of facial recognition systems, also looking at potential negative effects on civil and political rights and appropriate strategies. And then the health, wildfires, and climate change in California, which was published, you'll see, in October of last year, but is never more important than it is right now, provided priority policy considerations to the California legislature. And I will talk more about that in a later slide. Within the CITRIS Policy Lab, we not only conduct research, like I said before, we do research and engagement. And on the engagement side, we try to always make sure that we're not just publishing journal articles for the academic community, but we're translating that research into deliverables that can actually inform the public or policymakers. So we have written quite a few op-eds and blog posts, so you can check them out there. And I've listed a few of them here, so you can see just the wide variety of topics that we focus on, from blockchain to 5G. What does it actually mean for communities? Are they going to be able to harness it for good? As students go to online education, what should the FCC do to better ensure that all all students are able to be able to access not only the broadband that they need, but the devices to access broadband. We often think of the digital divide as just whether or not somebody has access to broadband, but it's also access to devices, connected devices, to be able to meaningfully use broadband. I can't imagine writing an essay on my smartphone in a parking lot of a McDonald's, but that's where a lot of our students are right now. We also published, I published an op-ed in Wired on the threat of deepfakes in the state and California's anti-deepfake law, which is again popping up right now because of the election in a few weeks. So talk about that. Some more of our op-eds that have been published, so you can go ahead and check those out. So I want to dive a little bit into the research that we do within the CITRIS Policy Lab. As I mentioned before, the CITRIS Policy Lab has had a partnership with Microsoft for the past 4 years. It's been a really great partnership. They allow us a lot of independence in the work that we do. Our work doesn't have to have final approval by them before publication, which is, I think, an obvious concern as an academic. You want to be able to do independent, rigorous research, if you are supported by the private sector. So I just want to preface this work by saying we've had full autonomy in the work that we do. And this research report was published on September 9th. And in that work, we looked at the effects of AI on public sector work and workers. So not only looking at what are the effects of integration of AI-enabled tools, especially AI-enabled tools, but you'll see the report is about emerging technologies more broadly. So we also talk about the use of virtual reality tools. But what are the effects of those tools on the ability for workers to perform their jobs more efficiently, effectively, and equitably? But because this is in the public sector, there's also an obligation for that work to minimize harm to the public and to serve the public interest. So we also looked at what are the effects of these tools on the beneficiaries of services. And we looked at 3 different sectors: K-12 education, social welfare services, and law enforcement. So the report is linked there. It ends with technology and policy strategies that we hope will be implemented within the state and also within the private sector. Up until this point in my presentation, I've been talking about these technology and policy strategies, but among which stakeholders? I think one of the most critical issues right now is an understanding that a lot of the effects of emerging technologies, if you can actually, it's both a private and public sector issue. It's not just at the public sector. We don't think of policy as just applying to the public sector, what we call hard policy, that they would implement legislation or directives or other mandated oversight, but that a lot of the the power right now actually lies with private sector and what they decide to do, because it is unregulated. A lot of this area that we address is very unregulated. And so we provide those recommendations to the private sector to better inform their decision making. And it's been, actually they've been quite receptive to that. And they have a willingness and an openness to collaborate with academics. So that's something else I want to express here on the presentation. For those of you who do research, the private sector, a lot of them, they are very willing to collaborate and they want to work with academia. And we have the private sector come to us saying, we have this issue and we would love your advice. So I just want to put that out there, that working with the private sector is an important part of the work that we do. As part of that report, we did host a panel session for the CITRIS Research Exchange, which was also held on September 9th. You can check out the video of the panel session there, and you can see we had Scott Mave from Microsoft, Saurabh Sanghvi from McKinsey & Company, and Elena Zaidi, who's now an assistant professor at the University of Nebraska College of Law. And so you can go ahead and check out that session where we discuss the issues around emerging technologies and public sector work. Right now, we are leading a very large project. This is the one that is keeping me hard at work and making me wake up in the middle of the night thinking about this important work. We're working with the California Department of Technology on a year-long project to assess the California state government's use of AI in its department and agencies. and to help them formulate a governance strategy to better guide their procurement, development, implementation, and monitoring of AI in government services. So you can see just a sampling of some of the state departments that we're doing an evaluation on, including the Department of Motor Vehicles. I don't know if anybody on this call, I can't think of a better department that needs some, innovative disruption than the DMV. And they are implementing some new AI-enabled tools, but also it's considering the effects of those technologies. So this collaboration, we will have a report that will be issued in November. And then after that report, we will issue playbooks that will help to guide individuals in state government on how to implement, principles of ethical AI development, including how they affect procurement strategies, including how they affect the needed assessment of AI tools for potential bias or discrimination, and also, how do you support AI readiness in departments and agencies? How do you make sure that staff have the appropriate skills to be able to implement these technologies, have the appropriate skills to evaluate the ethical concerns? And so that playbook side will be published in spring semester, and the report published in November is going to give sort of the broad overarching governance framework to help guide that work. This is, I should know, this is also a collaboration with the AI Security Initiative, which is at UC Berkeley. It's housed within the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity, and we're really excited to partner with them. I'm also really excited that today we actually published the AI legislation database, which I've been talking about for quite some time. We have created a database of all federal and California AI-related legislation. It's available through an Airtable, and you can access it at the URL there. It's also on the landing page of the CITRIS Policy Lab website. So if you go there, you'll see it right away. But you will see a list of all AI-related legislation at the federal and California level. You'll see a summary of the legislation, a link to the legislation either on Congress or for the California legislature. We've also included focus tags, which we created ourselves to help sort the list. So you can see, some of the focus tags, for example, include like effects on national security, if that's the focus of the legislation, effects on the workforce, whether or not the legislation has earmarked funds for the NSF to set aside to support AI research. So it's really great. You can sort by those tags and see, are there certain types of legislation that are being supported more, put forward more right now than others. You can also see who put forward that piece of legislation and their political party. So you can sort by, whether or not, you can sort and see, did Republicans introduce certain types of legislation more than Democrats? You can see the status of the legislation. And there's lots of other details. You can get really geeky and play with it, and it's a lot of fun. So I hope that this is a helpful resource for any AI scholars out there. So I want to also dive into our research on computational propaganda, especially as we prepare, well, we're not even preparing, we're full in on this election and the risks of mis and disinformation. There's one thing I want to clarify right at the beginning, because I hear the words misinformation and disinformation used interchangeably all the time, but those two things are different. So misinformation is the spread of falsehoods without a malicious intent. So it's if you see something and you share it and you don't know that it's fake or false. Now, disinformation, on the other hand, is a purposeful spreading of misleading information with the intent to deceive. So these are very different issues. So in our research in computational propaganda, we're definitely looking more toward disinformation. And we're looking at the use of algorithms, automation, and human curation to purposely distribute this misleading information. So I want to talk about two of our projects that I think are quite interesting. The first one, we looked at the role of Twitter bots in targeting of women's reproductive rights issues. And our goal for doing this is there's a lot of discussion about the effects or the potential negative effects of bots on social media on affecting election integrity. And we wanted to make sure that any recommendations that we provided were evidence-based. We wanted to conduct empirical research. So before the 2018 US midterm elections, we actually captured tweets from Twitter's search and stream APIs, their application programming interfaces, which the API allows you to pull tweets that are publicly available online. And you get some valuable information. You get the handle for who sent it, when they sent it. You can get some information about the account, like number of followers. You can get the retweet count for that tweet. So some interesting information. You can see who they retweeted, so you can look for network linkages. So we were able to pull from the API about 1.7 million tweets from over 460,000 unique handles. And to analyze that data to see, what are the most influential accounts and what are they spreading? What are they talking about in regard to women's reproductive rights, and how many of them are bots? We first performed social network analysis, which allows us to identify which accounts in the network are the most influential. So which accounts actually have the greatest control over the spread of information in the network. And you can either do a retweet network or a mention network analysis. A retweet network analysis shows those individuals who are retweeted a lot, and then mention is, accounts that are mentioned quite frequently. So in our analysis, we did that social network analysis. Then we applied some bot detection software that has been created by Indiana University called Botometer. I will preface this by saying Botometer is known to have some false positive and false negative errors. It's not perfect, but it's pretty much the standard of what researchers use. And so we used the bot detection tool to identify those accounts that, according to their model, were likely bots. And then we coded the tweets for those accounts that were highly influential in the network and we knew were bots. In this one, we also coded non-bots that were highly influential to see if they were spreading the same narratives. And our key findings, we found that for this issue, both pro-choice and pro-life bots were highly centralized. This is an important finding because up until this point, there was some thought that the bots are only targeting one side of a debate, but here we can see bots are being used on both sides, and it's probably an attempt to continue to polarize those two sides. Sorry about that. And then, we also analyzed the context of those tweets. So pro-life bots were more likely to send and retweet harassing language, whereas pro-choice bots were more likely to perpetuate political divisiveness. We issued a report, and in that report we provide, again, technology and policy recommendations. So we've continued this work, and now we're analyzing the data and writing up the summary from an exploration of the role of Twitter bots in targeting immigration, again, before the 2018 US midterm elections. Same process. Now, we captured fewer tweets, about 675,000 from over 145,000 unique handles. And we captured that data in, during a time in which there was a widespread debate about the caravan. Any of you remember the caravan coming up through South America, through Mexico to the United States, in the debate we had there. But there we also, instead of just looking at those highly influential bot accounts, doing social network analysis and bot detection on those, we also captured Trump's tweets at that time. And we analyzed his tweets that were just discussing immigration to see whether or not there was any effect on when Trump would tweet about something and then what bots would do. And we did find that bots replicated that harassing language almost verbatim of what Trump would say. In our paper, we have a graph that shows his tweet, Trump sending a tweet with certain language, and then you can see right afterward an uptick in the use of that language in tweets. And you can see it at 2 times when he did that. We're also seeing, like we did before, that bots are influential in spreading harassment, disinformation, and political divisiveness. What an interesting finding here is that actually all bots post an anti-immigration stance, which is a surprising finding for us. We thought at first this could be because of the hashtags we use. So we used hashtags to pull tweets from the API, and those hashtags might have only been used by, the anti-immigration camp. But in our other research, we found that regardless of whether or not the hashtag is on one side of the debate, usually you see both sides using that hashtag to try to communicate or polarize the other side. It's a common tactic to be able to communicate to your opposition by using that hashtag that they use, or you try to take over their hashtag with your viewpoint. And so in that, it was overwhelmingly anti-immigration, which we find very interesting. Another area of computational propaganda I mentioned before is around deepfake detection and election integrity. So California actually has an anti-deepfake law. I'd love for people if they can nod if they've heard about the anti-deepfake law. Well, so some people say no, good to know. I think it's okay you don't know about it because I don't think it's going to be effective, unfortunately. The anti-deepfake law prohibits the distribution of a malicious deepfake within 60 days of an election. Right there, you can obviously see a flaw. What if a deepfake is sent 61 days before? There's other flaws, like timing was one, misplaced responsibility. The law puts the onus on users of social media to flag these accounts, not on the platforms to flag the accounts, but on users to flag these issues or these potential deepfakes. And then it has to go into a review phase, which if you think about that, it also deals with the timing, because if you flag content, you can't remove it unless it's been proven. So you're going to have a video that's spreading, going viral all while it's being reviewed and the damage is already done. You have the burden of proof. You have to prove that it's actual malice, the video. In a country where our First Amendment protects freedom of speech, proving actual malice is a high standard, so that's also going to take time. And then I think the last issue that is going to make the law ineffective is that there's no remedy. There's actually inadequate remedies. So even if you were, throughout this whole process, to identify a malicious deepfake, there's no process to communicate to the public who may have been exposed to that deepfake that, hey, you were exposed to this. You should be leery in trusting it. That is not put in place. So unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be very effective. But a noble intent, we'll say. We're also leading some research on COVID-19 contact tracing, which has been very, very insightful, looking at the different technologies that are being implemented and their privacy and security concerns. That work was led by a graduate student, S. Freeman, from, they are a geography student. And that work is going to be released very soon. It'll be published on our reports page. In there, they did an analysis of different policies that are in place that will, determine the types of data that can be collected. Of course, in California, we have the California Consumer Privacy Act, which grants additional protections to people around their data collections, storage and use. There's also federal legislation. There's actually really bespoke legislation that has been put forward to specifically address privacy and security concerns from COVID-19 contact tracing systems, which I'll just side note say, I think that's not the best route. Instead, we need a national strategy around data privacy and security that can apply across different areas rather than having just bespoke legislation for each time we have a crisis where we're collecting data. So that work will be released soon. As Michael mentioned earlier, I am very honored that I was selected to serve as a Technology and Human Rights Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School in their Carr Center for Human Rights Policy. And I just wanted to mention the work that I'll be working on there in case there are others here on the call who have an interest in this space. The first project I'm working on is applying the human rights legal framework to the development of ethical AI principles, and especially into the operationalization of those principles. There are about 160 ethical AI principles that have been put forward by the public and private sector. And what we've really seen starting in 2019 is an impetus to move from principles to sound practices. And we see the human rights legal framework as helping to do that, helping to guide how do we move from principles of fairness, accountability, and transparency into these more legal frameworks that can help make sure that they're implemented appropriately in practice. We're also looking at the human rights effects of computational propaganda. We have 2 projects with the health initiative. I mentioned these earlier, so I won't go into too much detail on them, but this falls under our digital inclusion work, looking at appropriate digital inclusion policies. So, what subsidies should be made available to, internet service providers and to households. Obviously, there are federal programs in place already, like programs like Lifeline, that provide subsidized internet and telecommunications access, but looking at different types of models, public-private partnerships, different technology strategies that can be implemented to better ensure that vulnerable communities have access to broadband that they need to be able to work, learn and care from home. The Lighthouse Project is focused on older adults in assisted living centers, and the Activate Project is for low-income communities in the San Joaquin Valley. So one area I really want to spend a bit of time on today is around the engagement side, because I can imagine that some of you are thinking about your own research and how you might be able to translate that research to have impact. So I want to give a couple examples of the work that we're doing and some of our partnerships, and then we're going to go over different types of deliverables that you can develop to support that translation of your research. So I'll give some examples of like what should be included in a policy memo, a policy brief, and an op-ed. So the first project I want to talk about quickly is the Public Interest Research Alliance. I'm seeing an increasingly alarming issue that's coming up with platforms, especially social media platforms. And this issue is stemming from the implementation of nascent data privacy legislation, like the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, which provides individuals rights over their own data, and the California Consumer Privacy Act, which is has some similarities to the EU GDPR. What we're seeing is platforms are increasingly saying that they can no longer share data with independent third parties because of the need to protect personally identifiable information, or PII. And while I agree to a great extent, I am worried that social media platforms are using nascent data privacy legislation as a privacy shield to protect themselves from external review and scrutiny. And I think this is a critical issue, because if independent third-party researchers like academics and journalists weren't able to analyze data collected from the 2016 presidential election, we would have no idea of the scale of the effects of foreign interference in our election. And moving forward, if these companies become even more reticent about sharing that data, it's going to be extremely problematic for accountability and transparency of what's happening on these platforms. So the CITRIS Policy Lab has established something called the Public Interest Research Alliance. It's a multi-stakeholder, non-binding coalition that brings together academics, people from government, people from industry, people from nonprofits, to think about, we have this very important data privacy legislation which we want to uphold. But how do we ensure that that legislation does not inadvertently restrict the ability for third parties to gain access to data for necessary public interest research? And so we're working on this project right now. We've gotten quite a bit of support and partnerships on that work. We're also partnered with the Day One project on this to develop priority policy strategies that can be implemented to better safeguard this from happening starting at day one of the next presidency. We have also launched something called the UCwide AI Working Group. And this working group is mandated to develop principles that will guide the UC system's own procurement, development, implementation, and monitoring of AI within its own use. If we think about the UC system, it's 10 campuses. And if you think about how many people are affected by the use of AI tools within the UC system, it's a very, very large number. So if you just think about the use of those systems in like admissions, so selecting students who can be admitted, if that system is biased in a certain way, this is extremely detrimental for those students. Or if you think about the implementation of AI within hiring practices within the UC system, again, you can have these negative effects. I also want to point out that because the UC system is very large and we often procure these technologies from third-party vendors, if we set up procurement guidelines that require those vendors to conduct algorithmic risk assessments and show that they're implementing appropriate strategies to mitigate harm, we've now in some way kind of forced that vendor to change their practice, which then could, because it's inefficient for them to not do that in their other applications, they may then test those systems when they're implementing, not just within the UC system, but another private sector or public sector entity adopting that technology. So we think that there could be really great positive effects from this group. So again, it's across the entire UC system. We have representation from all 10 campuses right now. It's just getting launched up right now. You'll see the co-chairs listed there on the right-hand side of the slide. It'll be a year-long project. The deliverables will be ethical principles to guide UC in their procurement, development, implementation, and monitoring of AI. And also, we will have the members actually go into 4 subgroups where we know that AI is going to have the potential for an outsized negative impact. So that includes admissions, human resources, health, and policing. And their work is to take those principles and operationalize them within those 4 domains. I mentioned earlier, Camille Crittenden was the chair of this California-wide blockchain working group where they evaluated blockchain uses, risks, and benefits and the legal implications. They did issue a report. It was issued in July of 2020, and you'll see the report linked there. In our work on engagement, we also provide feedback on draft legislation. And so this is just a list of recent legislation that we've provided feedback on. We've provided feedback on other legislation, but this is just for the past 6 months or so. You'll actually see the CPRA is one of the ballot measures right now. I think it's 22 on the ballot. Is one that we had provided feedback on. We also provide feedback at the federal level. You'll see with the amendments to the Child Online Privacy Protection Act and the House Science Committee's AI Research and Development Bill. We also provide feedback internationally to the European Union. As we saw with the European Union's GDPR, it directly affects what the United States does. So providing feedback to Europe in the European Commission is really important because it's going to affect the United States. We also do briefings and roundtables. I've listed a few here that you can check out. I'll be doing a couple of roundtables and briefings coming up. You are more than welcome to tune in to the one next week on deepfakes, disinformation, and democracy, hosted by the UC Center, Sacramento. It's on October 21st at 12 p.m. Another area of engagement that we work on, we've developed a UC extension course called the New HR, Employing Equitable AI, where we go through different technologies that are being developed to make HR, with the goal of making HR more efficient, effective, and equitable. But we talk about some of the concerns of ill-conceived deployments and the need to implement safeguards. And that course is available to get a certificate, and been a really great experience building out that course. I wanted to mention a couple of our student engagement activities. So we've partnered with Roya Paxad at UC Santa Cruz. They're in her group Taraz, and we're working with them on a Human Rights by Design fellowship. The deadline has passed. We're reviewing proposals right now, but those fellows will work with us on a technology and human rights project. We also have the deepfake education competition I mentioned before. The deadline is October 19th, and in that we are crowdsourcing videos that will help to communicate to the public the risks of deepfakes, ways to identify deepfakes, and potential strategies to mitigate their negative effects. And that's a partnership with the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. The last thing I wanted to talk about with student engagement is, we've been working for some time on the development of a certificate in science and tech policy. And this is a partnership with the Goldman School of Public Policy and Berkeley Engineering. We had a group of graduate students come to us from the Berkeley Science Policy Group, and they had done a survey to grad students. They had a few hundred people respond, and overwhelmingly those students said, we're really interested in having a certificate in tech policy. And so we've been working on that. It's been postponed a little bit right now, obviously because of budget issues and the refocus during the pandemic on more critical issues. But I hope to get something launched very soon that will help to empower our graduate students in the tech policy space so that they can be leaders that are driving the necessary technology policy changes. So I wanted to go over some quick strategies in the work that we can help you with in the CITRIS Policy Lab. So the CITRIS Policy Lab can help you identify ways to translate your research to inform policy. We would be more than happy to meet with you to talk about appropriate policy recommendations that you might be able to give for the public and private sector based off of your research. We're also happy to assist in writing policy memos and briefs. If you've done research and you feel like there's a strategy that you want to communicate to key decision makers in either the public or private sector, we would be happy to help you draft those out. Also, that means assisting with white papers, op-eds, one-pagers, and other outreach materials. I will say that one thing that I've learned over the last 2 years is that the development of slide decks is not very helpful for people in government. What they really need is something succinct. They don't have time to review slide decks that might not have all the information. So contrary to our academic love of PowerPoint slide decks, it's not the best material to give to especially elected leaders and probably also the private sector. They're very busy too. And then the last, there's an opportunity to work with CITRIS Productions, which is our in-house media production team. We have an amazing videographer, Adriel Olmos, who can create really short, 1.5-minute videos about a policy issue to help communicate to elected leaders. So as you'll see here, succinctness is key. You got to get straight to the point and communicate your recommendations. Here's an example partnership where we did just that. We worked with Bruce Reardon, who is at the California Institute for Energy and Environment, to help him translate his policy recommendations into this white paper that was then presented to the California legislature. And as a result of this work, he was able to, present, I put here, to Governor Gavin Newsom's Forest Management Task Force and actually get his points into the hand of the ultimate decision maker, the governor. So I know, it's 12:52 and I want a little bit of time for discussion, but I want to go over some of these broader impacts, strategies that we can help you with. So I wanted to communicate what is the difference between a policy memo and a policy brief. And a lot of academics are turning more toward publishing op-eds, which I think is great to communicate your research results to a wider audience. So if we start with the policy memo, the goal there is really to provide a decision maker with background on a tech policy issue, a summary of alternative solutions, and a recommended best solution. It's about 2 pages in length, and I've given an outline below for the structure that it should follow. You start with that most important point first. What is the summary of the conclusions and recommendations right at the beginning? Like I said, oftentimes if you're meeting with these people, they might have 5-10 minutes. So you got to hit them with that elevator pitch right away. This is what you need to do. And you leave your 1-pager or 2-pager with them, and they or their staffers can review for more information. A policy brief is a bit longer. And this can be more general audience where you're helping the readers understand and make decisions about a policy issue. Again, I've given the outline there, which you can review. And then for an op-ed, it's to create public awareness about an issue and appropriate action or reflection about an issue. The structure is about 1 to 3 pages, and starting out why should anybody care about this issue? Let's flesh out the issue more, dig into it. What's the possible solution, or what should people know about it? Is there another viewpoint that needs to be expressed? And then ending on a call to action. I also wanted to share with you a couple of fellowship opportunities. So I am very lucky. I was selected to participate actually in the Aspen Tech Policy Hub, which is an amazing program. It's for technologists to be able to learn about the tech policy process. They offer fellowships, I think, maybe there's 3 cohorts a year, a summer, a spring, and a winter cohort. So I recommend checking them out. They're based in the Bay Area, and they offer a stipend for participation. And the other one is Tech Congress, where they actually place you with a member of Congress through a 1-year Congressional Innovation Fellowship. in Washington, D.C., where you will work on a tech policy issue. So I mean, amazing opportunity to be able to work directly with a member of Congress on these issues. So I'll pause there. Here's my contact information if you want to reach out to me. And then I'd love to hear, comments or questions from all of you.